My name is Claire Maddox, and 2 years ago, I was in a relationship that nearly killed my voice, figuratively and almost literally. When I met Damien, he was everything I thought I wanted. Charming, witty, ambitious, a published author with 2 books under his belt and a niche following. I was 29, working 2 jobs, and scribbling down ideas in old notebooks, writing in the cracks between shifts. He used to say we were literary soulmates. But somewhere between his 3rd glass of wine and his need to always be the smartest in the room, that changed. The compliments dried up and the critiques sharpened. Every idea I had became derivative. Every sentence I wrote was a clumsy cliché. I started hiding my writing. Literally, I'd save drafts under fake Excel spreadsheet names on my laptop. We lived in a cramped apartment in Brooklyn, him with his signed copies on the shelves, me with rejection slips and post-it notes taped to my desk lamp. He used to say I was playing writer while he was living it. And the worst part? I started to believe him. One night, I got up the nerve to show him a few pages from the novel I'd been secretly working on. It was personal, raw, loosely, based on a difficult chapter in my own life. He didn't even finish the 2nd page before handing it back and muttering, "It's not publishable. And honestly, it's boring." I don't know what I expected. Maybe encouragement, maybe a nod. Instead, he closed his laptop, said he was going out, and left me alone in that dimly lit room with nothing but my shaking hands and the open wound of his words. That was the first night I cried over a man's opinion. But it was also the last, because something cracked open inside me, something I didn't know I had left. I wiped my face. I closed his comments in my head like a door, and I kept writing, but I didn't tell him. Instead, I started waking up early to work on my manuscript in secret. I'd write in coffee shops on my lunch breaks. I found online writing groups, critique partners, and even entered anonymous contests. I began calling it the book that would never be read, not because I believed it, but because it helped me keep it mine. Meanwhile, Damien's 3rd book was floundering. He'd blame the editor, the market, the readers. He'd complain about how no one really got his vision. And when I tried to comfort him, he'd snap, "You wouldn't understand." The irony was brutal. I didn't leave him overnight. I wish I could say I packed my bags and walked out with a one-liner like in the movies. But the truth is, leaving, someone who controls the way you see yourself, doesn't happen in one clean break. It happens in whispers. And it starts when you begin believing your own voice again. 2 months later, I moved out. Into a 1-bedroom above a bakery. Rent was high, nights were cold, but the silence was sacred. And in that silence, I finished the manuscript he said would never be read. I remember the night I typed the final sentence. It was raining outside, the kind of rain that feels like a cleansing. I printed out the last page, held it in my hands, and whispered to myself, "You did it." No audience, no applause. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like Claire Maddox again. And what came next? Neither of us saw it coming. Submitting that manuscript was like sending a piece of myself into a dark room and waiting to hear if anyone clapped. I didn't have an agent, no MFA, no insider contacts. Just a document I believed in and a fire in my gut that burned hotter than his doubt. I queried 20 agents, 17 passed, 2 never replied. But the one who did, her name was Nina Keller, called my writing gutting, lyrical, and cinematic. She wanted to talk. I nearly dropped my phone when I read her email. We set up a Zoom meeting. I cleaned my apartment like it would matter on a video call. When her face appeared on the screen, framed by a wall of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, she smiled and said, "Claire, I read it in one sitting. I cried, twice, and I don't cry easily." She offered to represent me right then and there. I think I blacked out a little. Within 3 months, Nina had a deal on the table. A real deal. 6 figures, 2-book contract, a top publishing house. My hands shook as I signed the contract. I didn't tell Damien. We hadn't spoken since I left. But that night, I opened my old laptop, his laptop, the one he left behind, and deleted every single draft where I'd ever taken his notes seriously. When the cover reveal came, it went semi-viral. The design was stunning. Dark background, bold serif font, and a single wilted flower. People on Twitter started quoting early lines from the ARC copies. "This author writes like she bled onto the page," one influencer posted. Bookstagram picked it up, then TikTok, then the New York Times. It snowballed. And suddenly, I wasn't Claire the quiet girl with a dusty dream. I was Claire Maddox, author of The Stillness Between Screams. But here's where it gets wild, because Damien had a new book coming out too. He'd been promoting it for months, tweets full of arrogance, calling himself the last voice of literary grit. His cover was a grayscale mess of urban decay. The tagline? "For readers who aren't afraid of the truth." Subtle, right? I ignored it. I really did. Until my publisher emailed me and said, "Funny thing, your release date falls the same week as Damien Harlow's." I stared at the screen. That name, Damien Harlow, it hit me like a cold gust. The man who once said I was boring, the man who told me my writing would never matter. And now our books were going to drop, side by side. Suddenly, it wasn't just about getting published. It was about beating him. But I didn't say that out loud. I told everyone I wasn't worried, that I was proud just to be out there. And maybe part of me meant it. But the part he broke, the part that remembered crying alone in that Brooklyn apartment, that part wanted this win. Pre-orders started rolling in. Every time I got an update from Nina, my heart raced. Meanwhile, Damien was tweeting cryptically about oversaturation in the industry and how real literature doesn't trend. Translation: he was watching me rise. Then came launch week. My publisher sent a car. I was doing signings, podcast interviews, meet and greets. The line at my first bookstore event wrapped around the block. People held dog-eared ARC copies. A woman cried when I signed hers. And I knew, deep in my bones, that no man would ever make me feel small again. But Damien? He was watching. I know because I got an alert. Someone mentioned me on his latest post. He'd shared a blurry photo of his signing, 3 people, tops, and a caption that said, "It's not a competition." But it was, and he was losing. Then, the day the New York Times bestseller list dropped, I sat in a coffee shop alone, holding my breath as I scrolled. My book? 3. His? Nowhere. The barista asked if I was okay because I let out a weird laugh sob. I told her I was fine. I was more than fine. And Damien? He posted that he was postponing his book tour indefinitely due to creative burnout. But we both knew the truth. He'd been beaten by the woman he once called a footnote. People kept asking me the same thing. Is it about someone? I'd smile politely and say, it's fiction with truths tucked in. But if I was being honest? Damien was in there, not directly, not by name, but he was there. In the way the antagonist belittled the main character's voice, in the way he dismissed her dreams, in the way he always needed the last word until he didn't get it anymore. It wasn't revenge writing, it was healing. But healing can still sting the person who gave you the wound. About a week after the bestseller list dropped, I got a message request on Instagram. I stared at the screen for a good 10 seconds before opening it. Damien, the nerve. Congrats. I guess. You finally did it. Not sure why everyone's acting like it's the second coming of fiction, but whatever. Enjoy the attention while it lasts. Reached out for a feature. The article would be titled, The Quiet Rise of Claire Maddox, How a Reclusive Debut Author Shook the Literary Scene. I nearly cried reading the draft. She called my prose visceral. She called my career meteoric. She called me a voice that cut through noise with silence. And then, halfway down the page, she made a subtle comparison. In the same release cycle, contemporary writer Damien Harlow released his 4th novel, which struggled to gain traction despite previous acclaim. Perhaps readers are no longer interested in men telling women how to feel. I didn't write it. I didn't ask for it. But it felt like the universe answering on my behalf. And maybe that's the real win. Not that I outsold him, but that the world saw through him, without me having to say a word. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need public spats or subtweets or dramatic callouts. All I had to do was succeed loudly in the space he tried to silence me. Because silence, when chosen, is power. And my silence was now echoed in every bookstore window he passed. The first time I stood in front of a crowd with my book in hand, my palms were slick with sweat. I'd been invited to do a reading at Greenlight Bookstore, one of those iconic indie spots that had once felt like a distant dream. I stared at the rows of seats, every one of them full. People held copies of my book. Some had sticky notes poking out of the pages. One woman, maybe in her 60s, clutched her copy to her chest, like it was something sacred. The host whispered, "You ready?" I nodded, even though I wasn't sure. But the moment I read the first sentence aloud, the room went quiet. The kind of quiet you feel, the kind that says, "We're here, we're listening." And when I got to the part that always gutted me, the passage I wrote on a rainy night after Damien told me I was wasting my life, I looked up. People were crying. One woman in the second row reached for her friend's hand. A young man near the back covered his mouth like he didn't want to make a sound. A teenage girl wiped tears without shame. I almost couldn't finish. Because for the first time in my life, the words I bled for were echoing in someone else's chest. That night, I signed copies for 2 straight hours. People told me how the story mirrored their pain, how they felt seen, how they were ready to reclaim their own voices. And somewhere in the middle of that line, I realized this was the real success, not the numbers, not the rankings. It was being able to give something to others that I once couldn't even give to myself. Hope. But of course, even success comes with shadows. Because 2 days later, a new post appeared on Damien's blog. The title? The Era of Emotion Over Craft, Why Publishing is Losing Its Edge. Subtle. He never named me directly, but he quoted passages from my book, twisted just enough to seem like generic critique. He used phrases like melodramatic sob fiction and catharsis disguised as literature. And he made a point to say that a few tears at a reading doesn't make something timeless. At first, I was furious. How dare he? But then I laughed, because that blog, bitter and brittle and desperate, was the clearest admission I could have asked for. He knew he'd lost, and he needed the world to know he was still watching. The funniest part? That post got ratioed. Badly. Authors I admired jumped in, defending emotional writing. Readers flooded the comments with praise for my book. One person even said, "We don't need another bro with a superiority complex. We need voices like Claire Maddox." And Damien? He disabled comments. Meanwhile, the offers kept coming. A college wanted me to keynote their creative writing graduation. A production company optioned the rights to my book for a potential series. I had calls with showrunners. My agent was practically vibrating with joy. But I stayed grounded, because I remembered the days I couldn't afford groceries without picking up an extra shift. The days I scribbled in notebooks during 10-minute breaks. The nights I cried because I thought he might be right. He wasn't. And now, every bookstore display, every glowing review, every tearful message from a stranger was proof of that. But there was one moment that truly shook me. It was during a signing in Boston. A quiet man came up, holding a first edition of my book. He looked nervous, eyes darting everywhere but mine. When I asked his name for the autograph, he cleared his throat and said, "I'm Damien's brother." I froze. He rushed to explain. "We're not close, haven't been for years, but I read your book, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what he said to you, and I'm proud of you, even if he never will be." I blinked, stunned. Then I signed his copy. "For the brave ones who listen, even when it's hard." He thanked me, then left. And I just sat there, holding my pen, heart pounding. Not because of fear, but because in that moment I knew I had turned my pain into something powerful. And the ripple had reached even the place I'd never expected. You'd think after everything, he'd fade into the background. But men like Damien don't go quietly. A month after the tour cancellations, he resurfaced on a podcast. One of those long-form, let's talk craft and trauma kinds, hosted by another pretentious writer who'd once tweeted that women shouldn't write angry, knew better than to listen. But a friend texted me, "He's talking about you, Not by name, but you'll know. And I did. I listened to 3 minutes before I had to pause. Sometimes when a person feels small, they try to get loud. That's what I think is happening in today's publishing landscape. Too much shouting, not enough substance. No, there's a difference between vulnerability and literary skill, between bleeding on the page and actually crafting something worth reading. He smirked. The host laughed, and I remembered exactly who he was. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every woman he dismissed in workshop rooms, every young writer he silenced with a sarcastic eye roll, every gentle voice he buried under his need to be the loudest one at the table. That night I opened my inbox. There was a new message, no subject line. From Damien. I hope you know none of this would have happened without me. You wouldn't have had a story to tell. I stared at it, and something inside me, something small but sharp, snapped. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my notes app, and I started writing again. Not because of him, in spite of him. My second novel poured out like floodwater. It wasn't about him at all. It was about a woman who finally stopped explaining herself, who stopped waiting to be chosen, who stopped writing like someone was grading her. It was about reclaiming identity, not through revenge, but through clarity. Meanwhile, Damien went on a desperate little tour of literary blogs trying to reframe our story. We used to date, he admitted once. I think I inspired some of her work. It's flattering, really. Flattering. The same man who told me I was boring now wanted to be credited as my muse? I couldn't decide whether to laugh or vomit. I didn't need to defend myself. My readers were doing it for me. Every time he tried to link his name to mine, 1,000 voices shut him down. People posted screenshots of his old tweets, his snide comments, his passive-aggressive critiques of emotional fiction. They compared his Goodreads reviews to mine. And the difference was undeniable. I wasn't a one-hit wonder. I was a movement now. Book clubs, college courses, editorials, stillness was everywhere. And it wasn't about revenge. It was about resonance. I got invited to a panel at a major literary conference. Topic? Women who write their truth and why the industry fears them. I sat on stage beside authors I'd once idolized. When the moderator asked us about backlash, I took the mic and said, I don't write to hurt anyone, but if my honesty burns someone, maybe they were standing too close to the fire they lit. The room applauded. Somewhere in that crowd, I caught a familiar face, Damien. He stood near the exit, arms crossed, pretending not to listen. But his jaw was tight, his expression unreadable. I held eye contact for just a second, long enough to let him know I saw him. Then I turned away. Because this wasn't his story anymore. It was mine, and mine was already published. He couldn't revise it, couldn't edit it, couldn't put his name on the byline. No footnote, no credit, no erasure. Just me, Claire Maddox. The woman he underestimated. The writer he tried to silence. And now, the voice no one could ignore. 2 years ago, I whispered my stories into cracked notebooks, hoping no one would hear the tremble in my pen. Now I stood on the stage of a sold-out theater in Chicago, staring out at over 1,000 faces, each holding a copy of my book, each waiting to hear me speak. There was a moment, just before I stepped up to the mic, where I looked down at my hands. The same hands he once waved away like they weren't capable of crafting anything meaningful. And now they were signing autographs, gripping microphones, creating worlds that touched hearts I'd never even met. I adjusted the mic and began. There was a time when I believed my words weren't worth reading, that my voice didn't matter unless someone else approved of it. But I've learned something. Silence isn't humility. It's fear, dressed up like submission. And I'm not silent anymore. The room erupted. After the event, a young woman approached me, nervous, clutching her book to her chest like it was a shield. She whispered, I left someone like him too. I thought I'd never find myself again. But your book helped me start. Hugged her, tightly. Because that's the thing about healing. We pass it on. I never wanted fame. I just wanted freedom. And somewhere along the way, that freedom became a flag for others to wave. And as for Damien? Well, He tried to pivot. Of course he did. Suddenly he was tweeting about evolving as a writer and understanding emotional nuance. He changed his bio to listener, learner, creator. But it was too late. People remembered who he was when no one was watching. The emails, the arrogance, the way he talked over every woman in the room, even when they were telling their stories. Eventually his publisher dropped him, quietly. No press release. Just a ghosted tour and a final failed launch. And I didn't feel sorry for him. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I'd already spent too much of my life offering compassion to people who weaponized my kindness. I saved that compassion for the girl I used to be. The one who wrote under bedsheets at midnight, afraid her words would sound stupid. The one who reread rejection emails like they held clues to her worth. The one who stayed too long, loved too hard, and believed too little in her own brilliance. She deserved my grace. Not him. When my second novel hit number 1 on the bestseller list, I didn't celebrate with champagne. I walked to the pier, the same one I used to visit when I was broke, heartbroken, and invisible. I sat on the edge with my journal in my lap. No laptop, no phones, just pen and paper and the wind tangling my hair. And I wrote this: I am not here because someone gave me permission. I am here because I stopped asking for it. I am not someone's ex. I am not someone's footnote. I am not a shadow. I am the whole damn story. That night, I shared those words in a single post. No hashtags, no tags, no photo, just text. It went viral within a day. People wrote them on mirrors, tattooed them on wrists, printed them on classroom walls. And I realized, this voice I once tried to hide, it had become a chorus. Not just mine. Ours. Damien didn't matter anymore. Not really. He was just the noise I had to quiet in order to hear myself think. And now I wake up to messages from girls who thought their stories weren't worth telling. I read emails from women in their 60s, finally picking up the pen again. I hear my words echoed in rooms I've never stepped into. That's what writing does. It reverberates. And as for me, my name is Claire Maddox. And the next time someone tries to speak over me, I won't raise my voice. I'll just keep writing. Because there's nothing louder than the truth, especially when it's bound, published, and shelved in every room they once said I didn't belong in. The final time I saw Damien wasn't planned. I was walking out of a radio interview in Manhattan, midtown, early spring, the kind of day where the air hums with change, when I saw him. He was sitting alone outside a bookstore cafe. No laptop, no notebook. Just a lukewarm coffee and a worn expression that hadn't been there before. He looked up as I passed, and for a moment, we locked eyes. No one flinched. No one waved. But something shifted. Because unlike the last time we stood eye to eye, I wasn't scared anymore. He offered a slow nod, a tight, practiced smile, the kind you give someone who once knew the soft parts of you and maybe didn't deserve to. I nodded back. Nothing more. Then I kept walking, not out of cruelty, out of peace, because I no longer needed him to admit he was wrong. I didn't need a grand apology or a clumsy attempt at redemption. I had written past him. That's the thing no one tells. When you finally step into your power, closure becomes irrelevant. You don't need to slam doors or burn bridges. Sometimes you just outgrow the version of yourself that ever needed their approval in the first place. And that's freedom. Months passed. I finished my third manuscript. It was different, less rage, more reflection. A story about legacy, self-worth, and the invisible threads that bind women together through generations of being told to sit down and stay quiet. My editor called it my most mature work yet. Maybe it was. Or maybe I was just lighter. Because when the noise fades, the anger, the heartbreak, the bitterness, you're left with something clearer than revenge, clarity. It's not about proving someone wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you were always right to believe in your voice. I launched a mentorship program soon after. It was small at first. 5 young women from different parts of the country, each with stories they were scared to tell. We met weekly on Zoom, workshopped drafts, cried, laughed, believed in each other when we forgot how to believe in ourselves. 1. Of them, Alyssa said something I'll never forget. I used to think the worst thing was being ignored, but now I think the worst thing is being told who you are and believing it. That was me once, but not anymore. Now, every time I open a new document, I don't think about rejection, or Damien, or that night he laughed at my work. I think about that girl in me who kept writing anyway, the one who dared to imagine she was worth hearing. And when people ask me what changed everything, what flipped the switch, what made the book happen, I tell them the truth. I stopped asking. I stopped asking if it was good enough, if I was smart enough, if it was the right time. I stopped asking for permission, and I started telling the story anyway, because when they say you'll never make it, what they mean is, I hope you don't, because if you do, I'll have to admit I was wrong. And Damien? He was wrong, but I didn't need to say it, because the shelf at that very bookstore behind him, it had my name on 3 covers, and his nowhere to be seen.